was 3 minutes late for my flight to Seattle. Sprinting onto the first-class cabin breathless, I found my window seat occupied by Mackenzie, the new intern. My fiancé Logan leaned over her, gently touching her hair, murmuring reassurances. Without hesitation, before the doors closed, I turned, walked up the jet bridge, texted him ending our 5-year relationship, and walked away. Have you ever watched your partner hand your rightful place to someone else? Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from today. Standing in the airport lounge, I didn't cry. I didn't ask why or wait for an explanation. The roar of the jet engines outside faded, replaced entirely by cold, clinical clarity. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was an accounting exercise. I opened my laptop and logged into my accounts, my fingers flying across the keyboard with methodical precision. With a few steady clicks, I canceled the $85,000 wedding contracts. The caterer, the florist, the luxury venue were all gone in seconds. I knew I would lose the non-refundable deposits, but writing off that loss was cheaper than funding a lifetime of manipulation. Next, I drafted a concise email to my lawyers, instructing them to immediately lock down the $400,000 penthouse. I had been the one who mostly paid for it, and I was securing my assets before the ink on my text message even dried. I boarded the next available flight to Seattle, settling into an economy seat without a second thought. As the plane taxied down the runway, I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon some sense of regret or heartbreak, but there was only a balance sheet staring back at me. I reflected on the past 5 years of my life with Logan. I hadn't just been a romantic partner. I had been the silent investor in their version of a family. I had been the financial backbone, funding our entire lifestyle and securing the roof over our heads. I had even loaned his mother, Cynthia, $65,000 for what she claimed was a critical investment fund. It was a fake fund, just another withdrawal from my accounts. This wasn't revenge. It was accounting. As the flight climbed higher, I dissected the architecture of their exploitation. This was the trap of normalizing cruelty. I realized that for years, they had slowly and systematically escalated their demands, conditioning me to accept less respect while giving more of my resources. It is a psychological trap where the victim is drained over time, mistaking financial and emotional exploitation for familial duty. They had normalized their toxic behavior so thoroughly that taking my first-class seat and giving it to an intern was just another transaction to them. Love had simply become a subscription service, with me perpetually footing the bill. They weren't shocked by what they had done. They were only going to be shocked that I had finally stopped playing along. I closed my laptop as the flight attendant offered me a drink. I took a sip of water, feeling more liberated than I had in half a decade. Every dollar I had poured into them was a sunk cost, and I was severing the funding line permanently. The rest of the flight was spent mapping out my next steps. I didn't feel sadness, panic, or despair. I only felt the relentless pacing of someone who had just reclaimed her empire. By the time the plane touched down in Seattle, the narrative had already shifted. They thought they had left me behind at the gate. They had no idea I was already 10 steps ahead, dismantling the very foundation they stood on. The 5 years we spent together were officially liquidated. I was no longer a fiancé. I was a lead architect preparing for a hostile takeover. Arriving at the Seattle Tech Summit, the toxicity reached its peak. My phone buzzed relentlessly with furious voicemails from Cynthia. She had just discovered the canceled wedding funds and the severed accounts. Her voice was shrill, calling me a dramatic, selfish brat for ruining her son's big day. I listened to her panic without a shred of empathy, silently archiving the recordings for my legal team. Inside the summit boardroom, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Logan, desperate to punish me for what he perceived as a tantrum, made his move. He decided to force Mackenzie to present my complex software architecture to the venture capitalists. This was classic narcissistic injury and power compensation. When a narcissist's control is threatened, they overcompensate by attempting to publicly humiliate their target and reassert dominance. Logan wanted to prove I was replaceable, elevating his new intern to steal my spotlight and massage his bruised ego. But software architecture isn't something you can fake with a smile. Mackenzie stood at the front of the room, fumbling through the slides. She bombed spectacularly. She misread the core system structures, stumbled over basic algorithmic concepts, and fundamentally misunderstood the data integration pipelines. The venture capitalists sat in stony silence, their expressions shifting from polite interest to outright alarm. Mackenzie was single-handedly tanking a multi-million-dollar deal in real time. The room grew suffocatingly awkward. Logan's arrogant smirk melted into sheer panic. He shot me desperate, wide-eyed looks from across the boardroom, silently pleading with me to intervene. When the lead investor asked a highly technical question about back-end security protocols, Mackenzie froze, her face flushing bright red. Logan quickly stepped over to me, leaning down to whisper frantically. He begged me to step in, to save the presentation, to save them from total professional ruin. I looked at him, my expression completely blank. I didn't argue. I didn't gloat. I calmly reached out, closed my laptop with a definitive click, and leaned back in my chair. I refused to say a single word. I simply sat there in silence and let him drown. The venture capitalists watched the exchange, their sharp eyes missing nothing. They saw the incompetence unfolding at the front of the room, and they saw the calm, unbothered architect refusing to throw a life preserver to the man sinking the ship. Logan returned to the front, stammering through weak excuses, but the damage was irreversible. The power dynamic had completely shifted. His attempt to compensate for his bruised ego had exposed his utter lack of capability. I watched his professional credibility burn to the ground, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction. This wasn't just a failed pitch. It was the absolute dismantling of his professional facade, executed flawlessly by his own hubris. The venture capitalists began packing their briefcases before the presentation even officially concluded. Mackenzie was holding back tears, her career prospects evaporating with every passing second. Logan's hands trembled as he tried to gather the scattered documents, his grand power play collapsing into a humiliating spectacle. He had tried to replace the architect with an intern to soothe his narcissistic injury, but he only proved that without me, he had absolutely nothing of value to offer. The investors stood up, their patience exhausted. I remained seated, entirely composed, watching the ashes of his career settle around him. The story shifted from the boardroom to a clinical, professional battlefield. The lead venture capital investor, furious with Logan's glaring incompetence, intercepted me in the hallway. He recognized exactly who held the real value. Privately and with no hesitation, he requested that I oversee the entire project alone, cutting Logan out of the equation completely. I accepted the offer with a firm handshake. Back at my Seattle hotel room, the silence was a stark contrast to the chaos I had left behind. My phone screen lit up constantly. Logan had sent 27 frantic text messages, vacillating between anger and desperation. He commanded me to act normal, begging me to fix the mess with the investors and pretend the airport incident had never happened. I didn't even bother reading past the preview notifications. Instead of arguing, I opened my laptop and logged securely into the company's back-end servers. This was no longer a messy family dispute. It was a forensic audit. I moved through the server logs with surgical precision, tracing every digital footprint left by Logan and Mackenzie over the past few months. While my algorithms ran their queries, I pulled up Cynthia's written text messages on my phone. In her frantic rage over the canceled wedding, she had explicitly admitted to receiving the $65,000 loan, foolishly confirming that it was never an investment fund at all. I downloaded the entire conversation thread, compiled the screenshots, and forwarded them directly to my legal team. I attached a single instruction: officially shift this from a family drama into an aggressive legal debt collection. I wanted liens, I wanted asset freezes, and I wanted it executed immediately. I was untangling the messy web of emotional manipulation and converting it into cold, hard legal leverage. The digital audit continued to run in the background, lines of code scrolling across my screen as I systematically secured my intellectual property. I revoked Logan's access to my personal development environments and changed every administrative password. Anger had completely left my system, replaced by a ruthless efficiency. They had expected tears, ultimatums, and endless arguments. They had expected me to fight for a relationship that was already bankrupt. Instead, they were getting the full force of a corporate restructuring. I sat in the quiet of my hotel room, watching the data compile, knowing that every frantic text Logan sent was just another piece of evidence of his unraveling control. The personal betrayal was irrelevant now. I was operating purely on strategy, locking down my empire one server and one legal filing at a time. The battle lines were drawn not with emotions, but with undeniable data and binding contracts. Every notification from my legal team confirmed that the net was tightening around Cynthia's finances. The $65,000 she thought she had successfully extracted from me was now a legally binding debt with a ticking clock. I took a sip of black coffee, my eyes fixed on the server access logs. The hotel room was cold, matching the temperature of my resolve. I had spent 5 years optimizing my life to support them, and it took less than 24 hours to completely dismantle their access to my resources. Logan's 28th text message appeared on my screen, pleading for me to answer the door. I simply silenced the device and turned my full attention back to the glowing terminal on my laptop, ready to uncover exactly how deep their betrayal really went. Deep in the server access logs, I found the kill shot. The data was undeniable. Mackenzie hadn't just stumbled blindly through that presentation. The logs proved she had systematically downloaded my proprietary core architecture to an external private IP address. She had spent weeks quietly extracting the very foundation of my life's work. I traced the digital breadcrumbs, my focus narrowing into absolute zero. Digging deeper into a hidden shared folder, I uncovered the ultimate criminal betrayal. Since I operated as an independent contractor, my legal agreement explicitly secured my personal ownership of the source code until the final venture buyout. Logan and Mackenzie were secretly altering the internal ownership records. They were preparing fraudulent documents to file a patent for my software under their own names. His grand plan became crystal clear in the metadata. He intended to marry me, secure the legal rights of a spouse, and then force me to step down post-wedding. He was going to steal my intellectual property and secure the venture capital millions entirely for himself, with his new intern by his side. It was a calculated, long-term corporate theft disguised as a 5-year romance. I rubbed my eyes, but there was no heartbreak, only the terrifying clarity of an auditor uncovering massive fraud. They hadn't just stolen my first-class window seat, they had been plotting to steal my entire future. I downloaded every fraudulent patent draft, every altered ownership record, and every IP address log linking Mackenzie to the stolen code. I compiled the evidence into a single encrypted master file. They had grossly underestimated my access and my capability. I had built this system from the ground up. I knew every backdoor and every security protocol. They were trespassing in a house I had designed. I forwarded the entire compiled dossier to the lead venture capitalist, the company's CEO, and our corporate legal department. I didn't include an emotional narrative or a plea for justice. I simply presented the data, outlining the systematic theft of intellectual property and the breach of corporate compliance. This was no longer about a canceled wedding or a stolen seat on an airplane. This was a federal crime. I watched the progress bar as the massive file transferred securely to the executive board. My pulse was steady. I had been the silent investor in their family, and now I was the whistleblower bringing down their entire operation. Logan had thought he could manipulate my emotions to blind me to his financial and professional crimes. He had banked on my compliance and my willingness to keep the peace. But he had forgotten one crucial detail. I was the architect. I built the blueprint they were trying to steal, and I possessed the absolute power to tear it all down. The screen flashed, indicating the secure transfer was complete. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the laptop illuminating the dark hotel room. The magnitude of their scheme was staggering, but their execution was amateurish. They had left a digital trail so wide it could be seen from space. Logan's arrogant assumption that I wouldn't check the back-end logs was his fatal flaw. He believed I was too blinded by wedding planning and familial duty to notice the massive data hemorrhage happening right under my nose. I locked the master file and shut down my computer. The emotional betrayal was completely eclipsed by the sheer audacity of their corporate espionage. Tomorrow, there would be no tears and no dramatic confrontations. There would only be the swift, merciless execution of professional justice. I had the stolen blueprint securely back in my possession, and I was ready to deliver the final, devastating blow. First thing the next morning, the CEO, after reviewing my master file, called an emergency compliance meeting. He summoned the head of human resources, the venture capitalists, Logan and Mackenzie. The tension in the boardroom was palpable as I stood at the head of the table. With ruthless, methodical precision, I projected the data breach logs and the fraudulent patent drafts directly onto the massive screen behind me. The evidence was irrefutable. The CEO reviewed the intellectual property logs and immediately validated the evidence. The entire power dynamic of the room shattered in an instant. The executives stared in stunned silence at the sheer brazenness of the theft. Mackenzie's face drained of color. Human resources didn't hesitate. She was fired instantly for corporate espionage and escorted out of the building by security, sobbing uncontrollably. Logan sat frozen, his mouth opening and closing silently. The CEO revoked his project lead status on the spot. He was suspended immediately, pending formal legal action for corporate theft and fraud. His career was effectively over, his reputation destroyed in front of the very investors he had tried to swindle. I closed my presentation, packed my laptop, and walked out of the room without looking back. Later that evening, a sharp knock echoed through my hotel room door. I opened it to find a desperate, weeping Logan standing in the hallway. His arrogant facade had completely evaporated. He fell to his knees, begging for one more chance, pleading with me to remember the 5 years we had spent together. He cried about his ruined career, his debts, and how he had made a terrible mistake. I looked down at him, feeling absolutely nothing. I reached over to the console table, picked up a manila envelope, and handed it to him. Inside was a formal 30-day notice to vacate the penthouse, alongside a cease and desist order, and my lawyer's official notice of intent to sue for intellectual property theft and financial damages. He stared at the documents, his hands shaking as the reality of his total ruin set in. "You can keep the seat," I told him coldly, my voice devoid of any emotion. "I'm keeping the empire." I closed the door in his face and locked the deadbolt. The silence that followed was the sound of absolute victory. There was no screaming, no dramatic arguments, and no lingering doubts. I had systematically dismantled their secret plot, neutralized the threat to my life's work, and completely reclaimed my power. The 5 years we shared were nothing but a line item that I had successfully audited and expunged. I walked over to the window, looking out over the Seattle skyline. The city lights glittered below, matching the cold, clear focus in my mind. I had endured their exploitation. I had uncovered their crimes, and I had executed my judgment flawlessly. The empire was secure, and it belonged entirely to me. Logan's muffled sobs from the hallway eventually faded as the hotel security I had summoned escorted him off the premises. He had gambled my brilliant architecture against his own fragile ego, and he had lost everything. The venture capitalists had already sent over the new contracts, placing me firmly at the helm of the new corporate structure. I poured myself a glass of water, reflecting on the utter totality of the reversal. They weren't shocked by the severity of their own actions. They were shocked that the woman they deemed compliant had engineered their absolute destruction without shedding a single tear. The execution was complete, leaving no room for negotiation or mercy. I had defended my boundaries with clinical precision, ensuring that neither Logan nor Mackenzie would ever work in this industry again. The power flip was absolute. Autumn arrived, clearing the remaining chaos from my life with a cool, sweeping breeze. The air was crisp, matching the renewed, clinical clarity of my purpose. The legal proceedings wrapped up with swift, brutal efficiency. Logan was officially and permanently blacklisted from the tech industry, currently drowning under the crushing weight of massive legal fees stemming from the corporate theft lawsuit. He had nothing left to leverage. Cynthia, unable to sustain the grand illusion of her fake investment fund and terrified of impending criminal fraud charges, was forced to quickly sell her home to fully repay the $65,000 she owed me. I finalized the sale of the $400,000 penthouse, cleanly liquidating the very last physical remnant of that toxic 5-year subscription to their family. With the stolen code secure and my proprietary architecture protected, I successfully locked down the Seattle venture capital funding exclusively under my newly formed limited liability company. I sit in my new corner office now, the sprawling Seattle skyline stretching out behind me, and I want to speak directly to you. I didn't just take my money back, win the lawsuits, and simply walk away to enjoy the profits. I took every dollar of those recovered funds and launched a dedicated legal defense foundation. It is designed specifically for young female developers who need aggressive legal support to protect their intellectual property from predatory managers. This wasn't just about punishment or looking back at the past. This was the justice of the sower. I realized that true justice isn't merely about destroying those who wronged you. It is about actively building a future where others are protected from experiencing that same pain. It is the ultimate move of power to take the ashes of a profound betrayal and use them to cultivate a lasting sanctuary for the vulnerable. I completely redefined their legacy of theft, transforming it into a powerful resource of empowerment that will outlast all of us. I've come to realize that walking away from toxic people isn't a failure or a tragedy. It is the absolute ultimate act of self-preservation. Forgiveness isn't always for the other person. Sometimes, it's the only way to set yourself free by permanently and unapologetically severing their access to your life. I didn't break down or cry when they tried to replace me. I simply calculated my true worth, audited the entire situation, and ruthlessly repossessed my future. You cannot allow anyone to convince you that tolerating their exploitation is the required price of admission for love or family. Your brilliance, your hard-earned resources, and your peace of mind belong exclusively to you. If you've ever had to walk away from someone to protect your own brilliance, I want to hear from you. Drop a light bulb emoji in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe for more stories about reclaiming your power.